A lot of people, they want a high metabolic rate because they want to be able to eat and still lose weight, sort of thing, or maintain their weights. I'm still not entirely sure that having a high metabolic rate is actually a good thing. It's just like if you're have a car and you're running the engine at a very high rate. So you're going to use more gas, right? That's fine. And you're using more gas because your engine is revving at a higher rate. But what happens in the long term? Does it wear out faster? So that's always a worry. So people are always they're so worried about a low metabolic rate. I'm not sure that that's a bad thing in the long term from a longevity standpoint.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Chance, and I'm here this month with our very own Dr. Jason Fung. So, hi, Dr. Fung. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad spring is coming. All right. So, our first question is I'm curious if TFM intends or would consider doing a fasting mimicking protocol to be published for its members, possibly a TFM quick guide. I know we have Fat Fast, both for plant-based and omnivores. Is this a possibility, Dr. Fung?
Yeah, I think that certainly we can do that because the fasting mimicking diet has a lot of good science behind it. So it's certainly great to see the science and what they do as a 5 day. It's not a full fast, but it's sort of a modified fast. What they do is they give you all the food and stuff to take, so then that's fine. The only major problem is it's expensive. There's nothing wrong with the product. I mean, it's a little bit processed, but it's kind of pricey for 5 days. Now, mind you, you get the food, so you don't have to pay for food, but it is like 200 plus dollars, Canadian dollars anyway. I don't know the US price, but it's like 200 something. On the other hand, it is actually covered by some HSA and so on. So the cost can be deferred because I think they're trying to get it covered as a medical treatment, which it truly is actually. So there's a lot of good things about it, and I tried it. It's actually quite good. The only downside is sort of cost, and they're trying to figure that out by seeing if people, you can get insurances to cover it and so on. But I think that's something that we could certainly do with the TFM is actually put together something like that so that we could all do it together. So I think that's a great idea.
This next question is about fasting insomnia. All right. They said when they do a nomad, no meals a day, they find that they have trouble falling asleep and staying asleep. Is it the hunger increasing my cortisol? Is it the effect of the ketones? They're also taking oral progesterone, melatonin, and magnesium every night before going to bed. And they were wondering specifically, I know you've talked about the counter-regulatory hormones before, Dr. Fung, but they were wondering, what are your thoughts on valerian tea or kava tea to help with specifically fasting insomnia?
I don't have anything against the teas. I actually haven't tried those myself. But again, insomnia is likely from the counter-regulatory hormones, particularly the sympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic tone goes up, and that's noradrenaline and so on. So when you fast, your body actually doesn't shut down, it actually ramps itself up. So that's why it releases noradrenaline and sympathetic tone goes up because it's releasing energy, right? You're trying to move glucose from your stored system, like the liver, out into the blood. So that's what the counter-regulatory hormones do. So that makes you not sleepy because you have energy, right? It's just like if you take caffeine or something, which is again a stimulant. It's a sort of a stimulant, so it's going to make you have trouble sleeping. If these things help you, then that's great. But if you aren't able to sleep, sometimes you just have to sort of go to bed later or do something else. I find that a little bit too, right? So I normally go to sleep at a certain time, 12:30. But when I do the fasting, sometimes I actually do have trouble falling asleep too. So I actually sometimes stay up a little bit, which always worries me because I always think, oh, am I going to be really tired in the morning? But it usually doesn't work that way because I think I need a little bit less sleep. So yeah, if those teas help you, then that's great.
Yeah. I would caution people that if they're on medications to check with their doctor, because sometimes if you're on blood thinners or diuretics or any kind of neurological one, those are a little stronger teas. I would check with your doctor, your healthcare provider, just in case. For me, the best things that work are blue blockers. That's the thing I don't want to use, but those are the things that help me the most. This person's next question is one I'm very interested in. What's the latest research on autophagy, Dr. Fung?
There hasn't been too much lately. I mean, the problem is it's always hard to measure. So when do you know somebody's going into autophagy? So a lot of the data was in yeast and other bacteria and so on. And how much applies to humans is unknown. What people are sort of a bit more focused on is the effect of fasting on bigger picture things, right? Rather than the actual process of autophagy, what you start to see now is data on fasting and things like type 2 diabetes and weight loss and so on, because the whole field has not been well studied for so long. And fasting protocols are all over the place. But yeah, I don't think that there's a lot there because autophagy is more of a mechanism rather than a disease. So it's like it's what's happening. And that's all sort of being worked out in those bacterias and yeast rather than in humans because it's a lot harder to study in humans because there's all different types of cells, right? So as opposed to these single-celled organisms, there's liver cells and breast cells and so on. So there's not as much, but all the time what we're seeing is data on fasting and other diseases. And a lot of it is showing what we sort of expected it to show that, if you get rid of the metabolic disease, there's a lot of benefits there.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'll be honest here. I have had to really reword this question because it was really a medical question and asking for medical advice. So I have really reworded this so that it's a more general question. So, what does the research say about the relationship between HDL and triglyceride ratios? This person's score is around 0.77 on the ratio, so quite low. Ideal would be below 2. But having a high coronary calcium score, Agatston score, is that how you say it, Dr. Fung?
Agatston, I think. The typical cholesterol profile will have LDL, which is what everybody sort of focuses on because if it's high, they give you a lot of statins. And then HDL and triglycerides tends to go together. So low triglyceride tends to go along with high HDL. So usually they mean the same thing. So the ratio is not something that I typically look at. Most of the time, if you have a low triglycerides, you'll have a higher HDL. It's part of the mechanism. Diet actually has very little to do with the LDL, but the HDL and the triglycerides is much more dependent on the diet. So particularly carbs. If you eat a lot of carbs, your triglycerides tends to be higher. And then when your triglycerides are higher, your HDL tends to be lower. So those things all go together. I typically look at all of the panel rather than that ratio specifically. But again, the most important factor for heart disease is not the LDL. So everybody focuses on the LDL because that's the one that's amenable to drug treatment. So of course, there's been billions of dollars of marketing to sort of doctors talking about the LDL cholesterol. But in fact, if you're to take a single marker that is the most highly correlated to future heart disease, it's actually HDL. Because there's no drug to be marketed, then it gets a lot less attention. There, in fact, was a drug that was developed to raise HDL. And of course, it actually didn't do anything. It actually, like if you took it, your HDL was higher, but more people died of heart disease and so on. That's because the high HDL is not good by itself. The high HDL was good because it was a marker for lower triglycerides and less metabolic disease. So raising it doesn't do anything because it's just not taking care of the actual problem. So if you have the metabolic syndrome, then your HDL tends to be low. So if you then artificially raise the HDL and you still have the metabolic syndrome, well, it doesn't do anything. You do just as badly as if you didn't bother taking the drug. So the drug didn't work. So it's not the HDL itself that's the problem. It's the underlying cause of the low HDL, which is the metabolic syndrome, which is where the fasting really helps.
She's asking, or he or she, I don't know which one it is asking about the CAC score. Now, we just read the book, The Great Cholesterol Myth. We did it in January and February for the TFM book club. And I'm going to put the link to that in the show notes where the thread is over in the community forum. and also a link to cholesterol ratio calculator if you guys want to use it. But we did have a member who came and shared that she got a CAC score done about 4 or 5 years ago, and she's been doing strict keto since then. So her CAC score was high, but she did another CAC score and she has had no more plaque buildup since that time. So that was really neat to hear that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. And the score, which is a measure of how much plaque you have in the coronary arteries, again, is used as a marker for risk of future heart disease. And heart disease is caused by lots of things, but metabolic syndrome is a big factor. But there's others, right? There's smoking, there's exercise, there's genetics, there's sex, there's age, and lots of other things too. Inflammation and lupus and all these things, they all cause it. So it's not simply caused by metabolic syndrome, but is one of the biggest risk factors. So therefore, especially when we talk about risk factors, you want to really focus in on reversible risk factors because, you can't change your genetics, right? You can't change your age or your sex. So therefore, that sort of thing doesn't matter so much because it's not anything you can do anything about. But metabolic disease, smoking are the two biggest reversible risk factors. And that's where you have to focus. So by changing to a ketogenic diet or lower carbohydrate diet, being able to stabilize it, which is good because over time, what usually happens is it gets worse. If it stayed the same, that's actually very good. Some people have said had regression, but even just staying stable is very good.
Have you ever thought, I am my worst enemy when it comes to weight loss or health goals? If so, you are not alone. But this barrier does not need to keep holding you back. I'm offering a self-sabotage workshop that can end this pattern of defeat. Together, we will explore the root causes of your self-sabotage and create strategies to overcome the thoughts and behaviors that have been preventing you from feeling the success that you are seeking. You will learn to proactively avoid the pitfalls that have kept you feeling stuck and develop new responses to triggers that have served as roadblocks for years. Join me at TFM for my self-sabotage workshop that begins in May. The links are in the show notes. You can also enjoy 10% off any of the workshops and masterclasses we are offering from now until November on the TFM website. This includes the 3-pack and 6-pack bundles, as well as the All Access Pass, using the coupon code PODCAST10, capital PODCAST 10.
This person says there is a hormone cascade where our sex hormones are made from cholesterol. We know from member stories that female hormones become balanced on alternate day fasting regimes. In those successful cases, how does alternate day fasting affect the hormonal cascade so that it starts working properly again?
With the hormones, that you're talking estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are the sort of sex hormones. And the effect of insulin is mostly separate, but not completely separate. So insulin is more to do with metabolism and so on, which doesn't always impact, but they do interact. So people who have, in men, for example, who have obesity, you can get aromatization. So you turn some of the testosterone into estrogen. So you get sort of feminization of the body. So you get those sort of breast enhance, the men who get those little breasts and so on because of the increased estrogen. You get the opposite too, where high levels of insulin can cause various things. And the pathway is different, but you get that in polycystic ovary syndrome, where you get the high insulin levels, which causes the cyst to develop, and then the increased testosterone, so you get the hair growth and the anovulatory cycles that you see in polycystic ovary syndrome. So there's a few different ways alternate daily fasting or other types of fasting can influence the sex hormones in different ways. Usually for men, it would be the testosterone increasing the sort of fat cells, which in turn that testosterone into estrogen, so higher estrogen than normal. In women, you have higher testosterone than normal, again, due to the influence of the insulin. And then you get the cyst development in the kidneys. It's a little bit, the actual pathways are a little bit more complicated, but essentially the men get more estrogen, which is bad, and the women get more testosterone, which is bad because they're not getting their proper ratios of sex hormones and so on. The women can get higher estrogen levels too, but again, that tends to be not so bad because their estrogen levels are generally higher anyway.
I highly recommend anybody listening to listen to the Longevity Summit, where you were actually the host and you talked with Cynthia Thurlow.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and you talked a little bit about the female hormones and stuff. So that was good. Okay. So it says they were recently reading research that suggested that moderate weight gain during menopause, particularly in lean women, may offer a degree of protection against cardiovascular disease due to the increased production of adipose tissue derived estrogen, which can partially compensate for the decline in ovarian estrogen levels following menopause. What are your thoughts on this? May it be wise to welcome hormonal changes in creating a protective role of fat accumulation over the course of menopause transition? I appreciate your insights.
Yeah, that's going to depend on where you're coming from, right? So if you're very lean, then so perimenopause is actually one of the highest risk periods in a woman's life for weight gain. So if you look at weight gain or fat gain specifically, the menopausal period is the highest. And there's changes over time during the cycle, like in terms of the estrogen and progesterone. So in fact, your appetite actually goes up and down depending, which is very interesting. I was actually just looking at some data from Lumen too, looking at the changes not only in hunger during the cycle, but you actually change what you burn, which is quite interesting. So in the first part of the cycle, you actually tend to burn more carbs. The second part of the cycle, you tend to burn more fat, which is very, very interesting. And that's why Megan always says, well, if you're going to fast, try and do it in the first trimester because estrogen is building up. Estrogen actually acts as a bit of an appetite suppressant, so your appetite goes down, and you can see it when you have to do big studies. On average, people actually eat less and less as they get to ovulation, and then their appetite goes up. So, a very interesting data showing the effect of the sex hormones on appetite. During menopause, so the 3 years, so perimenopause, which is the 3 years before menopause, is again, if you look at big studies, there's actually a increase in weight just specifically in that period of time. And that's when estrogen tends to go down through menopause, right? People think it's because estrogen overall seems to suppress the appetite. So that's why during the cycle, as you get higher estrogen levels, you actually eat less. So if you look at how much people eat during the cycle, it actually goes down from day one to ovulation. It actually goes down, 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 down. And then progesterone goes up and then you eat more. But if your estrogen is just going down steadily, then you're losing that sort of inhibitory effect, and then you may wind up eating more. So on average, two people do gain weight in that perimenopause. And a lot of people say it anecdotally, and there's actually good data to suggest that yes, that is true, and that's a possible mechanism for that. So yes, if you're lean, then maybe it might be good to gain some weight. If you're not lean and you're overweight, then yeah, that's not such a good thing, right? So it's certainly going to be where you're coming from. But that perimenopause period of time is something that you really have to watch because a lot of people have noticed it themselves. But on the other hand, if you know that it's a high risk period of time, then you want to really focus in on good habits and fasting and so on.
Yeah, I get several clients. I would say almost half of my clients that come in and say, I've never been fat a day in my life. I'm going through menopause and I'm gaining like crazy. What's going on?
Yeah.
So cutting out the processed carbs helps a lot. Sometimes they can just improve their diet
Yeah.
and stick to 24s and stuff. And then they don't have the issue that other people have that are low and diabetic.
Completely.
So this person says, why might weight loss stall during a multi-day fast, even when following an extended fasting protocol with proper hydration, electrolytes, and exercise? What factors could influence the rate of weight loss, and how can one determine if and what adjustments need to be made?
Yeah, the weight is going to be quite variable because when you fast, there's a lot of water loss. So when you fast, insulin is going to go down, and insulin is a hormone that tends to make you retain water. So as your insulin goes down, it's actually going to lose, you're going to lose a lot of water. So there's an initial period of time where you lose a lot of water, which is not a bad thing. You know, a lot of people have a little bit of, they feel less bloated, they feel a lot better about it, right? But what you can get is a very, very quick weight loss at the beginning, which then as it sort of evens out, then you may retain a bit of water. So, obviously, if you're eating 0 calories, your body cannot burn 0 calories, right? There's just no possible way to do that. So you still need to lose some body fat, but it may be sort of balanced by regaining a little bit of the weight and so on as water weight, right? And that's why the day-to-day fluctuations are not always accurate. And some people say, well, I haven't eaten it and I haven't lost any further weight. It's like maybe because if you lost a lot at the very beginning, now it's just sort of evening out and your body's just sort of reaching an equilibrium, maybe overshot a little bit. And then that's why the weight is not always the most accurate thing to be monitoring.
Yeah. I was surprised when I think it was last year, I did a 6-month therapeutic fasting. I had gained some weight after my aunt died. So I did 6 months of therapeutic fasting. And when I stopped and went to TRE, no snacking, 2 meals a day, I continued to lose weight. It was like it carried on over. And so I was really pleased with that because I hadn't done that the first time I lost my weight. So I was like, oh, something changed in my metabolism. Matter of fact, one of the questions in the Q&A box is there a problem with lowering your metabolism when fasting? Do I need to worry about this?
That's a good question because for a lot of people, they want a high metabolic rate, because they want to be able to eat and still lose weight, sort of thing, or maintain their weights. I'm still not entirely sure that having a high metabolic rate is actually a good thing because it's just like if you're have a car and you're running the engine at a very high rate. So you're going to use more gas, right? That's fine and you're using more gas because your engine is revving at a higher rate. But what happens in the long term? Does it wear out faster? So that's always a worry. So people are always they're so worried about a low metabolic rate. I'm not sure that that's a bad thing in the long term from a longevity standpoint because you may be putting less wear on your body by running it at a slower rate. Yes, you can't eat as much and you'll have to eat less because you're burning less, but you can try to control your metabolic rate. But you have all these people who are, these people who are always trying to stoke your metabolic rate and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, yeah, I'm not sure that it's good. The best advice I can really say is that stick to a natural diet, stick to a healthy fasting period, and you'll probably do better. If your metabolic rate happens to be high or low, well, then that's fine. I would accept it. But if it's low, I wouldn't necessarily think that that's something that you have to correct. I mean, there are ways to you can try to bring it up. We know that, right? When you go on calorie reduced diets, for example, your metabolic rate tends to fall. If you overeat, you can raise it. But, I'm not sure that that's something that should be tampered with because I'm not entirely convinced that a low metabolic rate isn't actually good for you. Like I look at all these, I have a ton of patients like these elderly patients. A lot are Oriental just because that's my practice population, but they're in like their 90s and stuff. And really they eat very, very little, but they're not gaining weight, they're not losing weight. So clearly their metabolic rate is quite low. But they're like in their 90s and looking really good. And I'm thinking, maybe that's a good thing. Like if you think about the 100-year-olds and stuff, because I actually just recently had a couple of sort of extended relatives who had their 100th birthday. And they're never overweight. They're never like super active. They're always like, it seems to me that their metabolic rate is actually quite low because they're cold. They're always wearing a vest. They're always moving slowly. So it's like, okay, you're clearly not revving your system and burning a lot of fuel. But I'm just wondering if that is an issue or not. I probably wouldn't worry about it because it's possible it may be a good thing, and by tampering it, you may not.
I know some of the blue zones people eat OMAD. Megan warns about doing too many OMADs in the week, but that's if you're trying to lose weight.
Yeah.
But people who are already, they're at their ideal weight and they live in these blue zones, they're eating real food, whole foods, and they're doing basically 1 meal a day. That's a different story. That's a different population.
Exactly. Because if you're doing a lot of OMADs and you are trying to lose weight because of metabolic syndrome, then you need to get that down, right? In which case, then yes, maybe a higher metabolic rate at that time may be good for you. But exactly, it's
I should clarify. OMAD is 1 meal a day. So just for those of you who, all
right.
right.
Yeah.
And this was another long question, and they were asking about the R-to-R interval. And I finally figured out that they were talking about heart rate variability. And as a cardiac nurse, I can tell you that this is in its infancy. It's on a lot of the gadgets, your watches and your Oura rings and things like that. And the ideal way to do it would be to take you in, put you on a table, hook you up to a 12-lead EKG. That's how you really find out what your heart rate variability is. It's showing your gas and your brake ability, your stress response, to press the gas when you need it, to press the brake when you need it. And so it is, for me, it's a good reflection of my whole lifestyle intervention and what is helping with that. But this person is specifically asking if there are any things with gastric emptying scans. Are they considered the standard test for gastroparesis? With these R-to-R interval studies, may there be a better alternative to diagnosing gastroparesis in this? So I know this kind of, especially with diabetic.
Yeah, it's not really my area. So gastroparesis, there are various tests. Basically, you swallow something, which is usually tagged, and then you follow it and see how long it takes to sort of get through the GI system. Let's do the stomach. The heart rate variability is more like if your heart rate sometimes is very slow and very fast, that's a huge variability. That's to somebody else who's always at like 72 and next day is 72 and next day is 73, right? So it's just that heart rate variability is, I'm not sure. It's in its infancy because it appears to be important in that people who have a high variability may be at higher risk. However, it's probably not the heart rate itself. It's like, why is your heart rate going fast and slow and fast and slow? What's causing that? And then what can you do about it, right? Because that's the real issue. And so we're not at the point where we can say, okay, your heart rate variability is high, therefore this is what's causing it, and this is what you can do about it. We're sort of at the stage where we're saying, well, is this the real important thing? How important is it? Does it give us additional information as opposed to what we get already from things like the A1C and waist circumference and all that sort of thing? So that's where we are in terms of heart rate variability. Gastroparesis is sort of a separate topic. Diabetics get it a lot. And in terms of diagnosis, usually you can make it clinically, but for the other one, it's definitely something else.
I look forward to asking you more questions next month. Thank you, Dr. Fung. Take care.